Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast, right here in the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, Brice Lewis, back again to talk about everything in the football world. As we are coming off a crazy Week 16 in the NFL, a lot of things have become clear, a lot of great games, a lot of big plays, a lot of impossible plays have happened during Week 16 as we are making the final week push in Week 17 towards the playoffs. Welcome in to GSMC. So, today's show, we're going to obviously talk about everything that's happened in the NFL. Talk about what's happened with the AFC, the NFC, the wild cards, the top seeds, divisions on the line, everything of the sort. We're going to talk about all that today. Like I said, very exciting time in the NFL right now, and it looks to set up a great Week 17 coming up. First thing I want to jump into is I want to talk about the stacked AFC Wildcard picture, where you have Miami, Cleveland, Indianapolis, and Baltimore all fighting for the final spots, or all the wildcard spots, basically, in the AFC. If you watched the Saturday games, you saw that Miami pulled off a miraculous comeback after being down by 2 points with about 19 seconds left in the game. Ryan Fitzpatrick, coming in for Tua, who was struggling in the game, threw a deep bomb to Matt Collins, where he caught it. And I think the thing about it, if you watch the game, is that on that play, while he was throwing the ball, Ryan Fitzpatrick was getting grabbed by his face mask. So he basically threw a no-look pass, because he had his helmet turned when he threw the ball, and was able to still land it right in the soft point of the defense. And then they got a face mask penalty on top of that. Gave him 15 yards, put him in field goal range, and then one of the best kickers in the NFL this year, Jason Sanders, came in and kicked it, solidifying a Dolphins win and increasing their playoff chances. Because now they are 10-5, and based off results that also happened on Sunday as well, the Dolphins have moved all the way up to the 5th seed in the AFC. So now they're in position to be the 5th seed instead of being on the fringe at the 7th. Now, a team that's been in the playoffs firmly all this year now is sitting on the outside looking in are the Indianapolis Colts, as they are now the 8th spot in the AFC, and now they're having to hope for some results. They're basically having to hope that one of the teams above them lose in Week 15 for them to even have a chance. If none of the teams above them lose, they will not be able to get into the playoffs. And so, and if you look at the matchup, obviously Miami's the one that everybody's looking at because they play Buffalo, and we're assuming Buffalo's going to play their starters at this moment. And if that's the case, then that game's going to be a tough game for Miami to win. But if they can pull it out, then if Indianapolis wins, they'll be able to get themselves back into the playoffs. Now, if they lose, it won't matter if Miami loses, and they would still be the team. Indianapolis would still be the team out. So it's gonna be a very interesting playoff picture when it gets to that point. As it's crazy to say this, but we could have multiple 11-win teams and still one team doesn't make the playoffs. That's unheard of, especially with an extra wild card spot. Remember, I talked about how that extra wild card spot could allow for an 8-7, 9-7, and I was saying 7-9 team could get in, and now in the AFC, you have teams all could be 11-5, and still one doesn't get in. It just really kind of shows how deep the AFC is. Now, obviously, if you look at the top 5 current selections in the draft, 4 of those teams are occupied by AFC teams, so obviously those losses had to go somewhere, which, actually, more into the show, maybe next segment, I'm going to get into the top 5 teams, top 6 teams, and where they're looking at in terms of draft perspective. But overall, I just think that the AFC wildcard picture is crazy right now. And then if we go to the NFC wildcard picture, it's Chicago's still in it. Mitchell Trubisky and the Bears, we haven't talked about them, but Mitchell Trubisky and the Bears have looked really good. We saw that first game when Mitchell started against Green Bay on Sunday Night Football. They got blown out. People said, oh, the Bears are done. The Bears are finished. And I think they lost again the next week to Detroit. They had a lead, should have won, lost that lead. And then ever since then, they've been on fire offensively. They've had an offensive resurgence. And now with Arizona losing yesterday, now we're in a position right now. We're at a point right now where overall, that last spot in the playoffs in the NFC is up for grabs. Currently, the Bears have now taken over the 7th spot. So now the Cardinals are going into week 17 needing to win their matchup, because if they don't, that's not going to end well. And they play the Rams, which is a team that's still competing to make sure they're still good to go when it comes to the playoffs. And then you have the Bears, who are also playing against a tough team in Green Bay. So both teams are going against very tough teams in Week 17. So there's a chance that both could lose. Really, there's a chance that both could lose. But it's going to come down to the Bears, and it's going to come down to the Cardinals. One of those teams are getting in. If both teams lose, Bears get in. If the Cardinals win and the Bears lose, they get in. If the Bears win and the Cardinals lose, they're in. So that's pretty much the whole situation with the wild card spot over in the NFC, as it's just down to those two teams, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens, to see if they can pull it out at the end of the day. So it's going to definitely be very intriguing to continue to watch it manifest over time. But as you can tell through this NFL week, a lot of big things have happened. A lot of crazy things have happened. And this kind of makes me transition into the next news. As I'm not going to get into the NFC East right now. I'm going to get to them later into the show, as I want to talk to them separately about that entire race. But we have to talk about Dwayne Haskins, because it is reported that Dwayne Haskins has been cut. And it's not shocking that he was released, but it's just interesting. Week 17, you don't really see guys get cut week 17 unless it's like, injuries or something, like injury designation or something. Dwayne Haskins has not played well since becoming the starter for Alex Smith the last 2 weeks. And people could sit here and make an argument. He is the reason why the Washington football team has not clinched the NFC East, because they've been in the driver's seat the last 2 weeks and they've not been able to win. Now, they've gone against some good teams, but they've not been able to have any type of production offensively. They struggle offensively a lot. And Dwayne Haskins has been at the center point of that, turning the ball over, not scoring any touchdowns, and just struggling. And so Ron Rivera basically said, with this statement, just saying, I'm done. Ron Rivera knows he's not it. He got to go. And he made it happen. He cut Dwayne Haskins. So now Washington has a question going into the offseason. Now, Alex Smith is perfectly fine being the guy next year. I have no issue with Alex Smith being the guy. I don't think Washington's football situation is one of those situations where they have to go ahead and draft a first-round quarterback, because especially if they make the playoffs, they'll get a pick in the 20s. And so they could still get a quarterback, but a quarterback who probably still needs to sit maybe a little bit, maybe for a year, because when you draft a first-round quarterback that high, that's a guy, again, who you think still maybe is a development, has talent, obviously very good talent since he was drafted in the first round, but a guy that you may not want to start right away, and I don't feel like Ron Rivera would start right away. You have Alex Smith. He can handle the load. The team could still be good with Alex Smith. He did it with Patrick Mahomes. We saw what happened with Patrick Mahomes. He did it with Colin Kaepernick. Alex Smith has been in that situation multiple times. So, and remember, both times he's led teams to the playoffs with those quarterbacks on those teams. And obviously, I think Ron Rivera hopes for Alex Smith to be back this weekend for the final game of the year. I think he hopes that, obviously, if we have Alex Smith, we have our best chance to win. But, just going ahead, cutting Dwayne Haskins, I think that's just that. I don't think it's the end of Dwayne Haskins. I don't think this is his career being over. I think where Dwayne Haskins goes from here is I think there's going to be a team. Because usually teams like to say, okay, he has potential, he has some talent. Every team always feels like with players like that, maybe if he comes to our system, maybe if he comes to our culture, maybe he can be developed into something. Maybe, hey, we need a backup quarterback. Our backup quarterback is currently, going to be a free agent, might demand some money. We want to go a little bit cheaper at backup. Okay, let's go get Dwayne Haskins. At this point, Dwayne Haskins has no right to demand any type of money. He hasn't done anything in this league to demand anything. So, more likely than not, people are going to look at him as, okay, maybe a young guy we could bring in, help develop behind our guy. I've noticed a lot of guys are going on practice squads. Maybe you make him a practice squad quarterback. It just, like I said, put him in their culture, put him in the system, and see how he acts, see how he responds to it. It's something that I think could potentially happen with him. I don't see why it wouldn't happen with him, to be honest with you, because I think that, I just think Dwayne Haskins just is not ready. And I think that was something that I think was evident even with the last head coach and Jay Gruden. I think he knew Dwayne Haskins wasn't ready, but had to play Dwayne Haskins because they invested a high pick on him, and he just wasn't ready. And people thought, well, maybe this year. Now, we have to remember he did not have an offseason to really develop. So we can sit here and maybe say, oh, maybe that hindered him. But at the end of the day, he still looks like he struggles, even through another full season of practice and developing and watching Alex Smith and Kyle Allen. Still looks like he has the same issues that he had before. And that's just not going to get it done. So overall, I think it's just going to be, we'll have to see what happens with Dwayne Haskins. But like I said, watch the situation going into the future. Like I said, I don't feel like they have to draft the guy and say, okay, yeah, he has to be the starting quarterback now. I think what the goal is right now is that they're going to probably find a guy that they can develop, a guy that they feel like can be a starting quarterback, and then develop him behind Alex Smith. And Alex Smith is probably, listen, you can say Alex Smith is one of the best mentors in the league at quarterback, and I think that's why Washington right now, if we did a quick little, outside thing, is the most set up for the future in terms of future success to me, because of the fact that they're going to continue to improve this roster. They have good coaching, good constructive coaching, and I think that that's going to lead them to be very successful into the future. And with that being known, I think, like I said, we'll see what happens. Ron Rivera clearly made a statement by cutting Dwayne Haskins, like I said today, basically saying, yeah, he's not it, and we're not going to deal with it anymore, and I'm not going to put my team at risk, knowing that he probably feeling like, man, we should have been clinched the NFC East. We should have been clinched this division. Now we're going into Week 17 with 3 teams in the mix, and now we got to win our game and hope for the best. So definitely understand the reasoning and the thinking behind why he is doing what he's doing. But that's all that we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into, I'm going to talk about currently positioned top 5 teams in the draft, who I think they are going to go with in the draft in the direction right now is currently constructed. Just some early 2021 draft preview for the top 5, so you want to stay tuned for that. Also, before I go, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football, where we can talk, interact about everything happening in the football landscape, discuss college, professional, all of that. So stay tuned right here.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we basically recapped what's happening in the wildcard pictures on both the AFC and NFC side of things. Very exciting race over the AFC. Multiple teams finishing 11-5 and still one team not getting in potentially. It's crazy to think about. AFC's really deep this year, really a lot of good teams. On the NFC side, it's really down to two teams, Chicago, who currently is in the 7th spot, and Arizona. Arizona has to hope Chicago loses to Green Bay in Week 17, who's already clinched a bye week, so it'll be interesting to see if Green Bay wants... Actually, no, Green Bay has to beat Chicago to clinch a bye week. So they're going to play hard, but also at the same time, the Rams are also going to probably play their guys, and they're going to try to win the game next week just to get better rhythm after having that game against Seattle. So it's not going to be easy for the Cardinals either. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But at the end of the day, if both teams lose, the Bears still get in. So we'll have to see how things work out over there. But now we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to do something here where I'm going to kind of preview the top 5 picks in the NFL draft coming up this April, May, and just to discuss what I think the teams are going to do at their current positions, give my thoughts on their positionings, and go from there. And we're going to start with number 1, with probably the most obvious pick in this draft. Jacksonville is the number 1. They have clinched the number 1 spot after the Jets beat the Browns. They've clinched number 1. So the Jags now are the number 1 team. I've already said I believe that they will fire Doug Marrone, and they're going to have a new regime. And they're also going to probably move on from Gardner Minshew and let him have a start somewhere else. And so the pick that they're going to make is one of the most obvious picks of this year's draft. They are going to go with Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence. He has been the uninhibited number 1 pick since his freshman year of college. He's proven that he's one of the best quarterback prospects to come out since Andrew Luck, since John Elway. There was a lot of hype behind Trevor Lawrence, and that's why everybody was taking for Trevor Lawrence. A lot of people, for most of this year, the Jets were in this position because some people thought the Jets would finish 0-16. They thought that the Jets were preparing to move on from Sam Darnold to get Trevor Lawrence because he is such a generational talent. Well, now Jacksonville is in that position. And they should definitely make this pick. Jacksonville needs a new, fresh start. Even with Blake Bortles, when they had their AFC Championship run, they've never really had I'll just say a good quarterback since, David Garrard back in 2008, 2009 when Maurice Jones-Drew in them. And it just depends on how you feel about David Garrard as a quarterback. So they haven't had a guy since him that was actually a very successful quarterback. And so they need a guy who they can finally say, this is our franchise. Because they haven't been able to say that for a long time. Now, the one thing the Jags do have going for them is that they have some young guys that they like Robinson. He seems like a very promising back. They got some receivers, probably still maybe want to make a couple of upgrades there. Obviously, there's a lot of needs that this team has. Remember, they completely gutted their roster this offseason. So you knew going into this year they were planning on not having a good year. And, really outside of the first game of the year where they beat the Colts in surprising fashion, they have not won a game since. And they have not looked as good since. And so that looks like we know what they're trying to do in the future. We know the move they're going to try to make here. Trevor Lawrence should be the pick. Now, some people wonder, is Trevor Lawrence going to want to go to Jacksonville? Listen, I always feel like the best situation is a new regime. Because then he can come into a situation and say, listen, yes, Jacksonville may not have the best history or the best franchise history. But I don't know with the new guys that could potentially come in, I could be put in a position to be successful right away. Trevor Lawrence is probably going to be the guy who starts day 1 from Jacksonville. So whoever they bring in, I'm sure they're going to kind of go maybe with a more offensive-minded guy. I don't know. With a guy coming in from the college ranks, do Jacksonville look towards the college ranks to bring in? Or do they just look for a very creative offensive mind in the NFL ranks and try to work with Trevor Lawrence? Because that's going to be a very important partnership, that Trevor Lawrence, whoever the next head coach partnership is, because that's going to be very telling about how his career could start out in Jacksonville. And then we have the number 2 pick, which is the Jets. Now this is where the draft gets very interesting. So, you have Sam Darnold, who people think can still be a franchise quarterback, has shown flashes, has played well the last 2 weeks, has been the reason why the Jets have won in 2 big upsets over 2 good teams, playoff teams the last 2 weeks. So, do you move off of Sam Darnold? Because at this next selection, you could go with quarterback Justin Fields. But do you think Justin Fields is going to be better or is better than Sam Darnold? If you don't think that, you don't make that move. I think with this happening, I think this is solidified that Sam Darnold will stay in New York and he will be a Jet. So now if you're not going to take the quarterback of your New York, where do you go? Well, you still do have the top offensive tackle, and a lot of people think is the best offensive tackle prospect to come out since Quentin Nelson in Penny Swell, as they think he is one of the best talents in this draft, if not the best player in this draft overall. And so if you're the Jets, clearly your offensive line has been issued. Last year you drafted Mekari Becton. He actually has been a bright spot for the Jets this year. Maybe do you go ahead and take another tackle, get your 2 tackles basically secured with 2 top 5 tackles. You got Sam Darnold's offensive line right, and then boom, you're good to go and say, okay, now we can protect him on both ends, and now we can give Sam Darnold the protection we need. Now you might want to bring into this argument, do you maybe go receiver here at Devontae Smith? Because, the Jets do need a big play guy. I wouldn't go here with it. I think at the second pick, you got to take the best player available, unless they think a receiver is the best player on the board at the second pick. I think the tackle has to be what you go with here if you're the Jets. Go ahead, solidify that offensive line. Go ahead. You're going to have to protect Sam Darnold. And listen, the free agency's before the draft, so they could easily potentially go after a receiver. Listen, Odell Beckham's I think could be on the market. Could he potentially make his way back to New York with the Jets? That's a possibility. But I think that's something the Jets would look into. And they could improve the receiving core before that, and then they could go ahead and take the offensive lineman, and now they have 2 of the best young tackles in all of the NFL. Then at number 3 currently is the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Atlanta Falcons also have a very interesting situation. We've heard rumors of Arthur Blank saying whoever the next head coach GM combination, they have the ability to remove Matt Ryan from starting quarterback if they want. So now this brings up a question. Does Atlanta go with Justin Fields there? Do they go with Zach Wilson? I've heard Zach Wilson from BYU be in the conversation as well. Is a quarterback very much in play at that spot, knowing that you have access to that position? You probably won't go receiver because unless you're moving off of Julio, I don't think they're going to draft the receiver that high. If the Jets didn't go with Penny Swell, maybe you go with Swell there. Maybe you go ahead, Jake Matthews is getting a little up there in age. Maybe, you go ahead and take the franchise tackle. The Falcons have a lot of options to go down here. I think it just depends on where they feel like they need to go here. Do you potentially go defense here if you're Atlanta? I mean, it honestly is going to all depend on the new regime and the new head coach and GM. What do they feel like is the biggest change that need to be made? If you can clearly sell from these last few games to the Falcons, they have talent on both sides of the ball. So it's not like yes, the team has holes, but it's not like they're devoid of talent, where it's like they don't really have many good players, and so any really selection is going to work here. They do still have very specific needs they need to fill. But it's just a question that's going to be asked a lot throughout the offseason in Atlanta. Are they going with the quarterback? And if they do go to quarterback, who are they going with? Justin Fields, Zach Wilson? Do they potentially trade down? Do the Falcons potentially trade down from that spot to accumulate more picks? They're going to be one of the most interesting teams in the draft to me to look at here, because they could go a lot of many different directions. And if they end up keeping that 3rd pick after this weekend's games, I think that we will, like I said, depending on who they get, it's going to really make a lot of things change and a lot of things different. But also now, going into the 4th pick, which now is also an interesting pick, which is actually not the Houston Texans. The Miami Dolphins, as they have this pick as a gift from the Houston Texans, as they took on Jeremy Tunsil. They traded for Jeremy Tunsil, and they gave away a future first-round pick, which this is that pick, and now it's a top 4-5 pick in the draft, which is number 4 right now. So the Dolphins, coming off a year, or going into the year where they've been ahead of schedule, people feel like they're better than what people expected at this time, have a really good defense, one of the best defenses in football. The lingering issues on Miami is on the offensive end. So this may be where you take your first skill player in the draft. I think the Dolphins are going to look for a big play receiver here at this pick. I think the tackle's going to be gone. I don't think they're going to move off of Tua. I don't think they're going to go defense. I think they're going to go big play receiver. So that brings in Lamar Chase and Devontae Smith. Those are the 2 guys right now who are going to be on the Dolphins' radar, because you need a big play guy. Now, if you bring in Devontae Smith to a play with him at Alabama, so they already have chemistry playing together. They were a very dynamic duo at Alabama together. So that's a pick that they could go down. That's a pick they could go with. I think right now, if I was the GM of the Dolphins, that would probably be the pick I would make at this very second. Because, like I said, that history of Tua, him basically exploding on to the scene this year as the best receiver in college football, being in the Heisman Trophy race right now, proving himself as just a big playmaking receiver. I think if you get weapons for Tua, you can make this offense much more explosive and then make a much more dangerous offense, and then you can see Tua really run the show in that Miami offense. And then with the fifth pick of the draft, you have the Bengals, who've actually won a couple of games. So the Bengals are in an interesting position. So you have Burrow. Jonah Williams, a guy they drafted 2 years ago, has had a good year. Where do you go? T. Higgins has played well. I think you're going to probably go defense. This is probably where I think you might go with your first defensive player here. I think the Bengals are going to be thinking defensive. Their defense was the one side of the ball that struggled all year. Now, the only reason why potentially you may see offensive line discussion, and depending if offensive lineman rises up the board, is because what happened to Joe Burrow. Because Joe Burrow was beat up behind the offensive line this year. And Jonah Williams is only one guy. They still have other additions they need to make. And if somehow Swole dropped down to that pick, that would clearly be the pick for Cincinnati. They would go with him by far just because they know they need the help. But maybe there's another guy potentially that somebody would say, hey, we'll look into this guy. Maybe do you go center here? I don't think you go centers this high, but Alabama's guy. Alabama got a couple offensive linemen that are going to be first-round picks coming out this year. Potentially going with that. Like I said, so the Bengals have a very interesting selection to make here. It's either going to be on the O-line, the D-line, or somewhere else on defense. I think that's going to be the pick that you're going to probably make if you're the Bengals. Because I've always said this. The Bengals' skill position players are not bad. You got Joe Mixon. Bernard has played very well in his absence. A.J. Green has had a down year, but I still think he's a very capable receiver. T. Higgins has played well. You know what I'm saying? They have, like I said, they have some guys. So I think they could go, like I said, O-line, D-line, or any other place on the defense. And I think that may be the best pick for them to potentially make for them moving forward as they're trying to really get this team on the right track with Joe Burrow when he comes back. Because remember, we don't even know if Joe Burrow is going to be back in week 1 of next year because of the ACL. If he is, I'm sure they want to make sure, hey, let's protect this guy. And let's make sure we give him what he needs to stay in games, not have to be in a shootout every week, and try to be the best team we can be. And so those are my future preview in the top 5 picks currently constructed in the draft order right now. So as you can see, I raised some very interesting discussion questions. It sounds like school when I say that, discussion question. I'd raised some very good questions about what teams could go. Really, after number 1, the draft gets very interesting. Because it's just like, well, where do you go? Darnold, what do you do? Do you go with a quarterback, go somewhere else? Falcons, do you go with a quarterback there? Dolphins, where do you go? Do you go with a big play guy? It's just a lot of questions that have to be answered, and it'll be interesting to see what happens this draft around. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to go back into recapping the rest of Week 16, so stay tuned for that right here on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, I kind of gave a preview on the top 5 picks on the NFL draft with currently constructed top 5. Obviously, that could change after week 17, but I just kind of wanted to give a little peek into the future on everything that's happening at that time and who I think teams could potentially go with at those selections, potentially, or what direction they could go with in that direction. So, very interesting. Talked about, like I said, the top 5 teams currently selected. So, there you go. But before we get into this segment, I'd like to remind you guys, don't forget, whatever platform you're listening to the GSMC Football Podcast on, don't forget to leave a review or subscribe. We would definitely appreciate that here at GSMC. So don't forget to do that. Please don't forget to do that. GSMC Football, we love to hear your feedback. But now we're going to continue with my Week 13 recap. And so, first, I like to discuss Cardinals and 49ers. Listen, my fantasy championship was this week, and Stephon Diggs gave me 41 points on Monday Night Football. But really, who really sold me this week was Kyler Murray. I was expecting Kyler Murray to have a good week, and he didn't. Honestly, because of COVID, too. It's a whole story on my fantasy football team. I just know I should be a 2-time fantasy champion, guys. Okay, even though I'm not going to say it in the record books, I should be. I was, quote-unquote, screwed because of COVID. All right, if Jarvis Landry didn't get that, I probably would have won this week. But that's in here or there. But the 49ers and Cardinals played. And the Cardinals put themselves in the position that they were in earlier, like I said, with the NFC Wildcard picture, where now they're just basically like they could miss the playoffs. And the Cardinals, they started the season so great. 6-2, leading the division. And they have just fallen apart down the stretch. And without that Hail Mary DeAndre Hopkins, would be 7-8 right now. They wouldn't even be 8-7. And so it's one of those things where Kyler Murray was hurt. They weren't the same team. Now he's healthy. This past game, the 49ers have just had a good game plan. Listen, the 49ers have showed us they're still a talented team. They've just dealt with so many injuries and inconsistencies at the quarterback position. It was just too much for them to overcome. But if you don't think the 49ers are going to come back next year and be a good team, you're mistaken. We don't know if Kyle Shanahan's going to stick with Jimmy G next year, or if they're going to move on. There's going to be some quarterbacks on the market. Matthew Stafford, Carson Wentz, potentially, they could maybe go with. But if maybe even Matt Ryan, if he wants to call back to there. But if he gets that right quarterback, or if he can get better quarterback play, and this team could be healthy and stay healthy, the 49ers could easily be a playoff team again next year to me. And I think this game really showed that. They were able to get pressure on Kyler Murray all game. They still have one of the better secondaries in all the NFL, and it showed. And that's why I think the Cardinals struggled to move the ball. And Nick Mullins just did just enough to be good enough on offense for them to get this win. So, just a really great job, there, with the 49ers finishing the season on a good note. Obviously, this isn't the end of the season, but, if you could continue this, success going into the next game, it's just always look at the season and say, listen, we have the potential. If we could just get a couple of things to change for us and we get some guys healthy, we will be good to go. And I think that's going to be the big thing moving forward here. And then I want to get into the NFC East, because I was talking about it earlier with the Washington football team, how they've lost the last 2 games, even though they've had a chance to clinch a division in the last 2 games. And now we're going into a week 17, where now the Eagles, not the Eagles, they're out of it. Not the Eagles. The Cowboys, the football team, and who's the other team going to play? The Giants all have a chance to win the division. It's coming down to 1 week. If the Giants win, if the Giants win and Washington and Dallas loses, they'll win the division. If the Cowboys win and Washington loses, they'll win the division. If Washington wins, they'll clinch the NFC East. So they still have the easiest path out of all the teams to clinch a division this year. Out of all. Washington is playing Philadelphia, who's obviously going to be looking to spoil Washington's hopes. Hopefully, Alex Smith is back. And that will be what gets them over the top. So that's the hope there. If Alex Smith can come back and be healthy, they'll have a good chance to beat Philadelphia. With the Giants, they're playing the... Hold on a second. They're playing the Cowboys. So this is a big game for both teams. Is literally the Giants need this win and a Washington loss to win the division. Or, like I said, Dallas can win the game, get a Washington loss, and they'll win the division. So it's going to be, this is a big, big, big opportunity for New York to still win this game. So it's like I said, Washington right now, they're the team that has their destiny in front of them. They just have to go out and win. But the Giants and Cowboys are still very much alive. And it'll be a very interesting situation to see who comes out of the NFC East as the division champions. Now, if you had to ask me who was the easiest team you want to play, probably I would say the Giants, just because offensively we know they're very limited. They're not that good offensively. Defensively, they're a good defense, but I don't think I wouldn't say that they're better than Washington's. They're better than Cowboys. Cowboys, their biggest thing is the Cowboys can score points. So if you can just limit their offense, you can probably get plays on that defense. So it's not going to be a matter of, oh, we're going to struggle to move it on Dallas. It's going to be more of a matter of, can we slow down Dallas's offense? Where really Washington and New York kind of have the same story. If you can limit that offense and to make enough plays on the defense, you have a good chance to win those games. And so on and so forth. So, the NFC East in general is just all up in shambles. And it's just, to me, the team that would probably, if there's a healthy Alex Smith, with their ability to run the football, and the fact they can get after your passer, Washington would probably be the team I wouldn't want to play. Which is the 4th seed, so they play the 5th seed, and currently the 5th seed right now in the NFC is Tampa Bay, so it looks like it would be Tampa Bay, Washington, the first wild card game. And that would be an interesting matchup. I think you have Ron Rivera, you have a pass rush that can get after Brady, though I do think Washington's weakness is their back end, and that's where you would say Tampa Bay has their strength. And then, we'll have to see what Alex Smith can do against, that Tampa Bay team, and it might be a game we have to keep an eye on. So, definitely very interesting that's happening in the NFC East as well. Also want to get into the defending champs having a very close victory over the Atlanta Falcons, 10-14. It wasn't 10-14. It was 17-14. Very close game. Came down to the wire. I want to give a shout out to the Falcons' defense. The defense has played lights out. Outside of that one half against Tampa Bay last week, they have played absolutely superb football since making the change to Raheem Morris. Raheem Morris has pushed buttons on that defense. Now, offensively, they haven't been as effective as they were at the beginning. But defensively, they've played very well. They went against toe-to-toe with the defending champs. It kind of reminded me last year when the Falcons played San Francisco, and they were the number 1 seed in the NFC, and they were the Super Bowl team. And the Falcons went toe-to-toe against them and actually beat them on a last-minute game-winning touchdown to Julio Jones. Last-second touchdown, actually, to Julio Jones. That's kind of what that reminded me of this time. Now, obviously, Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes came back, won the game. I don't like this narrative. The Falcons blew another lead. I mean, literally, it's just a football game. You went back and forth. The Falcons took the lead in the fourth quarter. The Chiefs came back and took the lead. I don't see that as blowing a lead. I just think that's just such a narrative with the Atlanta Falcons. People are just so ready to say if they led at any part of the game, they lost it. They blew a lead, especially in the fourth quarter. It doesn't matter if we were up 1 point. If we just kick the field goal and go at 1 point, go into the fourth quarter. If we don't score, they score a field goal, we blew a lead. To me, it's kind of ridiculous in that sense. The Tampa Bay game, the Bears game, those are blowing leads. Blowing leads to me is like you had multiple touchdowns and you blew it. If it's a one-position game throughout, I don't look at that as blowing the lead because it's not like y'all had that much leeway and lost the game. It was close all the way through, and Kansas City just made it happen at the end of the day. So, for me, I look at that and think to myself, hey, they played really well. Now, some people are asking themselves, well, dang, this is another close game for Kansas City. They're struggling against the Falcons. Is Kansas City really ready for the playoffs? Listen, I think we need to calm down. Because the thing is, Kansas City's still winning these games. So clearly, Tampa, now why do I keep saying Tampa? Kansas City still wins. They know how to win these games. So that's the biggest thing. I think sometimes we get so caught up in how people win and think if they're not winning in a certain way, that means they're not maybe as good as we think. Or maybe they're not as great as we think. And I think sometimes that's a little, I feel like people can overlook that too much or look too much into it. The fact is, Kansas City's still winning. They're still going to get the bye week. Whoever plays Kansas City knows you could never feel comfortable with Patrick Mahomes. Even if it seems like they're struggling, you could never feel comfortable with them. They could go on fire in an instant. So, really, overall, to me, I think Kansas City is still a very dangerous team. And I think they're still, in my eyes, the prohibitive favorites to win the Super Bowl this year. But, because, listen, they've gone against teams you thought they should have blown out, close game. They went against one of the best teams, if not the best team in the NFC, the Saints, and beat them. So, clearly, when they play against competition, you can sit here and say they play down the competition. Whatever you want to say, they're winning. And if you win, that's what counts to me at the end of the day, is if you win games. So, I think we don't need to look too deep into what's happening with Kansas City. I don't think we need to look. We don't need to overly look at what's going on because they're playing well. And so, yeah, I think that Kansas City will be fine moving forward. Now we already heard that Andy Reid is planning to rest some starters in Week 17, so we probably won't see Patrick Mahomes this week. Maybe Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, potentially you won't see them this week. The main stars of the Kansas City Chiefs, but everybody else is going to play. And, I understand it. You don't want to get them hurt before going into another bye week. So, definitely understand why that would be the move they would actually end up making. So, that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to finish up the show with more Week 16 talk. We got to talk about that crazy game between the Miami Dolphins and the Las Vegas Raiders and other NFL news. So stay tuned for that right here on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we got into some more Week 16 recap of everything that's happening. Got some AFC East talk, Chiefs talk, a lot of talk. See, we're recapping the entire Week 16. But before we get back into what we're going to finish out the show with, I would like to remind all of you, please don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football. That is GSMC_football, where we can keep up, update, and everything that's happening in college and professional. So now we're going to go ahead and get into some more talk. And we got to go back to the Saturday games. Miami and Las Vegas. Crazy game. If you watched the end of that game, Ryan Fitzpatrick came in for Tua, who was struggling. Threw a pass deep down the field to Mac Hollins. And made one of the biggest plays of the game. And they won. But the thing I really want to talk about from that is Tua and Fitzpatrick. People are wondering, it seems like Fitzpatrick gives Miami the best chance to win. Because Tua seems like he still struggles in certain situations, and he's been basically pulled twice since becoming the starter. So should it be Fitzpatrick's team, or should Tua still be starting? And I think two things can be true. Tua deserves to start in 2021 and be the starting quarterback of the Miami Dolphins. But also, Fitzpatrick gives his team the best chance to win right now. But I also understand why Flores is doing this. Because he feels like he needs to give Tua the experience. He feels like Tua would have never been able to learn, develop any of that if he had stayed on the bench this entire year. And so I think he looked at things and said, okay, if Tua could just continue to make steady improvements, we continue to see the things that we like in practice, and we continue to move forward as a team, then I think it'll be justified in keeping him as the quarterback. And you would think, you're currently in the middle of trying to make the playoffs. You're currently trying to really get there. And for me, I look at the situation, and like I said, I understand why they start Tua now. People are wondering, well, the key to me actually is going to be what do they do in Buffalo? Because Buffalo has a decision to make since they've won this game if they're going to play their guys. Now, the perception is they're going to play their guys to wrap up the number 2 seed, even though it won't necessarily change that much. And so that's like the first question. So we don't necessarily know if Buffalo is. If Buffalo is, then you can sit here and say, okay, Miami has a chance to lose. But there's also a chance Miami could win. So it really is just a matter of who do you think is going to play. If Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, all of them sit, you would think even with Tua as the starting quarterback, okay, they can win this game. If that changes, then maybe you'll sit here and say, okay, maybe that isn't the case. Maybe they could win. Like I said, these are all questions that people are going to be looking for answers to. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward. And it'll be interesting to see if Miami does go back to Fitzpatrick. We don't know if Tua is going to continue to struggle moving forward. Will he be able to bounce back from the performances he's had? These are all questions. So it's just something we're going to have to keep an eye on Miami. And we're going to have to see what ends up happening with that situation. Because I'm sure, Alex, after Fitzmagic happened, people are going to raise that question. If Tua struggles again, people are going to wonder, why is Ryan Fitzpatrick not playing? And that's going to be the thing. But then we get into the Sunday night game and talk about Titans and Packers. The Packers needed this game to make a statement. A lot of people said Green Bay's not a physical team. Green Bay gets punched in the mouth, they don't know how to respond. They're a finesse team. They're too Rodgers dependent. Well, and this game was a statement game. Remember A.J. Dillon? Hasn't really done much most of this year. Came out in this game, had a big game. Him and Aaron Jones had a big rushing attack, over 200 yards on the ground against Tennessee's defense. And defensively, they stepped up and stopped Derrick Henry. Titans only scored 14 points. So, clearly, the Packers have now, I think, established themselves as a legitimate team. Because remember, there were questions. Are the Packers still a fraudulent team? Because you always feel like when they win against a team that was physical, they never seem to have their best performance. And the Packers have pretty much, for most of this year, been an up and down team. I think that's something most people can agree on. You know? They've been very up and down. And so, winning a game like this is very important, I think, for their confidence moving forward. I think it's really big, for Aaron Rodgers' MVP hopes, because people think this performance he had against Tennessee might have solidified his MVP. And just big for them going to the playoffs is now they may actually be the best team in the NFC. Rodgers hasn't made it to the Super Bowl in about 10 years. It's been a while. And I would feel like this year is one of his best years to do that. It's one of his best years to make it. And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Rodgers when the playoffs start. They're the number 1 seed in the NFC. So they're going to get by. And usually the number 1 seed plays the lowest seed out of the wild card round. So, they'll be in position, to make it to the NFC Championship game. Only got to win 2 games because it's a Super Bowl. And we're just going to have to see how it goes. We're going to have to see how everything works out. And we're going to have to see how everything turns out. Overall. So, like I said, we're going to have to see how everything works. Just some quick news, though. Seattle releases defensive tackle Snacks Harrison after wanting to be released after being inactive on Sunday. So Snacks Harrison may be a guy, any team maybe needs that one last defensive lineman pickup, maybe going into the playoffs, got some injuries. Snacks Harrison is on the market. So that's a potential. Also, there have been some rumors that former Ohio State and Florida head coach Urban Meyer is looking to maybe crack the NFL ranks, and an exec said it smells like he just wants Trevor Lawrence. So they're saying that they feel like he may just be doing this to potentially get on the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes. So maybe does that look like Jacksonville will be the destination? So that would be the big thing. And I think the Jags job in general has become more attractive because they do have that number 1 pick. You can get a fresh start in Jacksonville. You get Trevor Lawrence, a generational quarterback. And those types of things can be very attractive to a guy who wants to become a coach or a guy who wants to be a GM to say, we're going to have the face of the franchise. And then if I construct a very good team in Jacksonville around him, you're going to be credited with the fact that you created this team around Trevor Lawrence, the credit with Trevor Lawrence. Head coach, GM, surrounding him with weapons, running backs, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, corners, safeties, all that. And so if Urban Meyer's really considering it, I think he should. I don't see why he shouldn't. And, I get it. He's trying to potentially find the opportunity that's best for him. Because sometimes there's just some guys who sit here and say, I won't get back into coaching unless it's a good situation for me. And so we'll have to see if that's something they want to do overall. But, I mean, we'll have to keep an eye on it moving forward overall and so forth. But, like I said, in general, that Jacksonville job is becoming extremely, extremely popular. So we're going to have to see what happens. But that's all the time we have here on the GSMC Football Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being part of my day. Guys, like I said, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football. Don't forget to subscribe or review on any place that you're listening to this podcast on. Also, don't forget to listen to our other basic podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. There's many, 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 many podcasts that we have here, so don't forget to check that out. This is your host, Brice, signing out. Have a good day. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your holidays. And a Happy New Year.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.